Picture this. You are sitting in a conference room. The air conditioning is humming really loudly.
Yeah, and the coffee in your paper cup has probably gone completely cold by now.
Exactly. And there are, I don't know, about 12 people sitting around this massive mahogany table.
Sounds incredibly intimidating.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then the meeting leader claps their hands together, leans forward, and says those terrifying words. They say, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Oh, man, that is just the worst feeling.
Right. Suddenly it feels like the oxygen has just been completely sucked out of the room. Your heart starts hammering against your ribs.
Your palms get clammy.
Yes. You know exactly who you are. You know what you do for a living. You know your entire career history. And yet your mind just goes completely, utterly blank.
It is an incredibly visceral reaction. And honestly, it is a universal human experience.
It's so strange, though, because you'd think it would be easy.
Well, we tend to think of communication as this very sterile, logical process, right? You assume you have the data in your brain, so you should be able to just open your mouth and output that data.
Like a computer.
Exactly like a computer. But human communication, especially the act of establishing your identity in front of a new group of people, it's deeply psychological.
Because there's so much pressure.
Huge pressure. It actually triggers some of our oldest evolutionary alarm bells because it is fraught with immediate social stakes. You feel exposed.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating today's deep dive to unpacking this specific phenomenon. We are tackling one of the most universally stressful but undeniably essential skills you can have.
And that is how to talk about yourself.
Yes, how to confidently introduce yourself. Because whether you are prepping for a high-stakes job interview, or maybe joining a new team on a Zoom call, or just trying to make friends in a brand new country, mastering the self-introduction is your ultimate shortcut.
It really is the key to being well-informed, prepared, and just in control of your own narrative.
And if your goal is figuring out how to talk about yourself in English, or you want to learn English fast, this is basically the ultimate podcast English for Easy Conversation guide.
Absolutely. And we are not just going to, hand you a cookie-cutter script to memorize. That doesn't work.
No, it really doesn't. We've pulled together a massive stack of research today to really understand the mechanics beneath the words.
We have a lot to get through. We are looking at academic papers on second language acquisition, which is often referred to as SLA, and diving into these really fascinating socio-psychological frameworks.
Plus, we're bringing in expert insights from language learning platforms, right? Places like Preply, Eddie Avenues, and NovaKid.
Yeah, and we are also exploring practical vocal training methods, like the shadowing technique from YouTube linguists and analyzing some really great boots-on-the-ground communication guides from Oxford Online English and the British Council.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is pretty ambitious.
We want to move way beyond rote memorization.
We need to understand the actual mechanics of communication. We want to show you how to manage your own psychology when that spotlight swings your way.
And, maybe most importantly, discover how learning to navigate these introductions actually unlocks a completely new version of your personality.
But before we can even begin to look at the structural formulas of what to say, we have to isolate the root cause of the panic.
We have to start with the psychology.
We do. Because if we don't address why your mind goes blank in the first place, any linguistic strategy or vocabulary list we give you is just going to crumble.
Oh, it'll completely fall apart the second that adrenaline hits your bloodstream.
So let's talk about that adrenaline response.
Yeah.
In the academic sources we reviewed, specifically the ASCD research, which focuses on educational leadership and curriculum design, they identify this phenomenon called foreign language anxiety, or FLA.
And the statistics they found regarding higher education settings are just mind-blowing.
Seriously, blew my mind. They discovered that psychological barriers, so factors like speech anxiety, severe shyness, and a paralyzing fear of making errors, contribute to a massive 88% of poor oral performance.
88%.
I know. That means when someone is stumbling through an introduction almost 9 times out of 10, it is not a lack of vocabulary or grammar knowledge.
It is sheer psychological interference. It completely upends the traditional approach to language learning.
It really does. Because FLA isn't just, a mild case of butterflies in your stomach.
And not at all. It is a highly complex psychological phenomenon. It wraps around your self-perception, your personal attitudes, and the very raw feelings of vulnerability that emerge when you are acquiring or operating in a second language.
It makes sense when you think about the cognitive dissonance it creates.
Exactly. Think about it. You are taking your complex complex, nuanced adult intellect, and you are forcing it to be expressed through a beginner's or intermediate toolkit.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is, and that discrepancy feels incredibly dangerous to our social standing. You feel like you sound childish when you know you are a smart, capable adult.
The ASCD source provided a case study that illustrates this perfectly. And honestly, reading it was just heartbreaking.
Oh, the story about Maria. Yes.
Yeah, they tracked a student named Maria from Venezuela. Now, Maria had an incredibly strong academic background in her native country.
Her written work in English was practically flawless.
Right, it demonstrated this deep, nuanced understanding of the academic content, but physically in the classroom environment.
She suffered from what researchers call the invisible student syndrome.
She was basically a ghost. If the teacher called on her, her face would flush, her posture would just collapse, and she would offer these tiny, breathless, one-word answers.
The fear of making a public mistake had physically crippled her ability to speak.
And Maria's situation isn't an isolated incident. It represents a massive systemic crisis.
It really does. This anxiety affects a huge portion of the 5.3 million English language learners currently in the U.S. public school system alone.
But we shouldn't just view this as a classroom problem for kids, right?
Definitely not. Take Maria's physiological reaction and project it onto the millions of adult professionals globally. People sitting in corporate boardrooms dealing with the exact same invisible student syndrome during a quarterly review or a networking event.
Okay, let me stop you there and push back on something, so I want to make sure I am fully grasping the mechanism here.
Sure, go ahead.
If I freeze up during an introduction at a corporate networking mixer, you are saying it is not because the English word for my specific job title just evaporated from my memory?
No, the word is almost certainly still in there.
So it feels more like my brain has hired a bouncer to stand at the door of my vocabulary, and that bouncer is actively blocking the words from leaving my mouth because he has decided the social situation is an active threat.
That is a phenomenal analogy. I love that. And it maps perfectly onto a foundational theory in second language acquisition. It's known as the affective filter.
The affective filter. Okay, break that down for me.
Let's look at the neurology and psychology behind your bouncer. In SLA theory, the affective filter is basically this imaginary screen that processes emotional variables.
Like stress and confidence.
Exactly. When you are relaxed, confident, and feeling socially secure, that filter is lowered. Information, vocabulary, and complex grammatical structures just flow in and out of your cognitive centers freely.
But what happens when you get stressed?
Well, when anxiety, stress, or self-consciousness spike, which is usually triggered by a perceived social threat, the amygdala in your brain takes over.
Ah, the fight or flight center.
Yes. It triggers a stress response, and that affective filter slams shut. The vocabulary is still securely stored in your brain's filing cabinets, but your bouncer has barricaded the doors to protect you from the perceived danger of public humiliation.
Wow. So what exactly sets the bouncer off? Why does the simple act of saying, "Hi, my name is," cause the amygdala to hijack the brain?
It comes down to the intersection of two things: internal self-awareness and interpersonal sensitivity.
Okay, interpersonal sensitivity. What does that mean in this context?
It means that introducing yourself is not a neutral act. It is deeply vulnerable. You are establishing your identity out loud under the immediate, real-time evaluation of a group of strangers.
That does sound terrifying when you put it like that.
Right. Your interpersonal sensitivity skyrockets because you are hyper-aware that in the span of 30 seconds, these people are judging your competence, your cultural background, your intelligence, and your social standing.
That is an enormous amount of pressure to place on a single string of sentences.
It is. You aren't just communicating data. You are trying to prove your right to occupy space in that room.
So if we know this neurological bouncer is constantly on high alert, how do we train him to stand down? Because we still have to introduce ourselves.
We do. And the sources offered a really fascinating look at how progressive educators handle this.
Oh, right. There was a middle school teacher mentioned in the research, Mrs. Lim, who tackles this interpersonal sensitivity head on.
Yes, through a method called error normalization.
Let's talk about Mrs. Lim. So a student in her class was speaking and said the phrase, "I catch the ball."
A very common mistake for learners.
Very common. Now, the traditional kind of archaic way of handling this would be a sharp public correction. The teacher would say, "No, that is incorrect. The word is caught."
Which instantly signals to the student that they have failed.
Exactly. It embarrasses them in front of their peers and basically ensures that the affective filter locks down tight for the rest of the semester. But Mrs. Ling didn't do that.
No, she handled it brilliantly.
She paused the class and actually pointed out that the student had correctly applied a highly complex English linguistic rule. They had successfully added the past tense ed suffix to a verb.
She explained that the student's brain had processed the algorithm perfectly. They had just simply encountered an irregular verb that defies the standard rule.
We really need to analyze the psychological architecture of what Mrs. Lim did there. By normalizing the error, she completely reframed the event.
She did. It was no longer a humiliating public failure. It became a highly valuable data point demonstrating the brain's active learning process.
She basically validated the student's underlying intelligence.
Exactly. And when a learner starts to internalize that their mistakes are not character flaws or signs of low intelligence, but rather just empirical evidence that their brain is actively mapping a new complex system, their interpersonal sensitivity drops dramatically.
The perceived social threat just disappears.
Yes. And consequently, the effective filter lowers. The bouncer steps aside.
I hear what you were saying about normalizing errors to lower anxiety, but I can imagine a listener thinking, well, doesn't that risk reinforcing bad habits? Like, if I just accept my mistakes, won't I just keep sounding unprofessional in boardrooms?
That is a very common concern. But it misunderstands the difference between performance and acquisition.
How so?
The goal of error normalization isn't to say that catched is the correct word and we should all start using it. The goal is simply to remove the paralyzing shame associated with the error so that the cognitive pathways remain open.
Oh, I see. So if you aren't panicking, you can actually learn.
Exactly. Once the filter is lowered, the learner is actually far more capable of absorbing the correct irregular verb caught because their brain isn't busy managing a localized panic attack.
Yeah.
You have to give yourself permission to be a work in progress in real time.
So core takeaway for you listening right now is that when you inevitably stumble on a word or mangle a sentence while introducing yourself, you have to forcefully stop your brain from viewing it as a social disaster.
It is literally just your neural pathways rendering a complex linguistic algorithm in real time. It's totally normal.
Okay, so we have diagnosed the psychological barrier,
Yeah.
but lowering the anxiety is only the first step. You still need to know what to actually say when the filter is open.
Right, because even with a lowered effective filter, when the adrenaline of a job interview hits, you do not want to be desperately inventing a personal narrative from scratch.
No, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Huh.
You want a low cognitive load structure to fall back on. You want muscle memory.
When cognitive load is high, meaning your brain is processing the interviewer's facial expressions, the temperature of the room, and your own internal monologue all at once, your working memory is severely compromised.
You can't think on your feet as well.
Right. You need a structural framework that guides your narrative without requiring intense real-time computation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We looked at materials from Edu Avenues, Reezy Fit, and various SLA structural models, and they all converge on one absolute gold standard framework for formal introductions.
They call it the present, past, future formula, or the PPF framework.
PPF, present, past, future. Why is this specific structure so effective?
It is the most robust structure available because it aligns perfectly with the way the human brain naturally processes narrative information. It offers a distinct beginning, a contextual middle, and a forward-looking resolution.
Which keeps the listener securely anchored in your timeline. I see people call this a movie trailer for your career, but let's stay away from that cliche. I actually think a better analogy for the PPF framework is a well-architected GPS route.
A GPS route? Tell me more.
Yeah, think about it. You have to start by dropping a pin exactly where you are right now. That is the present. Then you briefly show the major highway you traveled to get to this coordinate. That's the past.
Oh, I like this.
Right. And finally, you enter your ultimate destination to show them where you are heading next. The future. It gives the listener a sense of motion and direction.
I like the GPS analogy because it implies efficiency. And efficiency is paramount here. The data across the sources indicates that the ideal response to the dreaded "tell me about yourself" prompt utilizing this formula should be tightly timed.
How much time are we talking about?
It should clock in between 90 seconds and 2 minutes total.
So if you break that down, you are looking at roughly 30 to 45 seconds per section. Present, past, and future.
Exactly. And the sources outline some very strict danger zones regarding that timeline.
Yeah, if your introduction is under 90 seconds in a formal interview setting, you risk looking underprepared or maybe lacking in substantial experience.
But if you push past the 2-minute mark, you have officially lost the room. The interviewer's attention span will just snap, and you are essentially holding them verbally hostage.
Which nobody wants. So let's deconstruct the 3 pillars of this 90-second framework to understand how to actually build it. The first pillar is the present.
This is your current coordinate. It needs to include your current professional title, a brief outline of the scope of your responsibilities, and crucially, 1 or 2 real, measurable outcomes you are currently driving.
You are establishing immediate baseline competence. Okay, then you transition to the past. This is the short historical arc that got you to the present, and the expert consensus here is ruthless.
It really is. You must ruthlessly edit your history. Skip everything that does not matter.
So no talking about your high school summer job.
No! If a past experience does not directly and logically connect to the job you are currently interviewing for, it gets cut from the script. Period.
That makes sense.
This is the exact point where the vast majority of candidates fail. They treat the introduction like a chronological autobiography. They start from their university days and just plod through every minor role they've ever held.
But the interviewer already has your resume sitting right in front of them. They do not need an audio reenactment of it.
Precisely. They want a curated narrative that highlights relevant momentum.
And finally, we have the future pillar. This is the clincher. Why this specific role? Why this particular team? Why now?
This is where you connect the trajectory of your past and present directly to your aspirations within their company.
Let's examine some real-world applications of this to see the mechanics in action. Eddie Avenues provided a brilliant example for a recent graduate who's trying to enter the market.
Right. Imagine a recent marketing graduate using the PPF. They would start with the present. They might say, I recently graduated with a degree in marketing, and for my senior capstone, I interned at an e-commerce company where I ran their social channels and successfully doubled their engagement metrics within 3 months.
Wow, okay. And then they pivot to the past.
Yes. They say, before that intensive internship, I served as the president of a campus student organization where I learned the fundamentals of planning and executing full-scale event campaigns.
And then they wrap it up with the future.
Exactly. They say, I am now looking to start my career with a team that takes data-driven marketing seriously, and based on your recent product launches, your group looks like exactly that kind of environment.
It is remarkably tight and incredibly effective. Let's look at another one, this time from Oratrix, focusing on what they call a fresher, someone entering the technical workforce.
The candidate? Let's look at Karn Verma. He introduces himself.
For his present, he states he is an electronics engineering graduate and immediately highlights a specific circuit design project from his final semester that actually won a department showcase.
And then he connects that straight to the future. He states he deeply enjoys the challenge of troubleshooting complex hardware problems, and he wants to apply that specific diagnostic skill to the open role on their engineering team.
If we look closely at these two examples, notice what they are not doing. They aren't trying to impress the room with massive multisyllabic vocabulary words.
No, they aren't using vague, flowery adjectives like, I am a highly motivated, synergistic team player.
Oh, I hate that phrase. They're using concrete verbs and nouns.
Which is the secret to their psychological impact. They work because they linked specific past actions to measurable empirical results.
Right. Curran didn't just claim, I am good at engineering. He provided immediate empirical credibility. A winning circuit design project.
And the marketing graduate didn't vaguely say, I have social media experience. They said they doubled engagement metrics.
This provides the listener with concrete evidence of competence, which instantly bypasses any skepticism and builds trust.
It is the classic narrative rule of show, don't tell. It's the difference between telling someone you possess a great sense of humor versus simply telling them a clever joke.
That's a great way to put it. And because the PPF is structured so rigidly, it dramatically lowers the cognitive load on you, the speaker.
You aren't scrambling in the dark for what sentence comes next.
Exactly. You just have to hit your present coordinate, trace your past route, point to your future destination, and then explicitly stop talking.
But we have to acknowledge the limitations of this tool. The PPF framework is an absolute powerhouse for a formal, scheduled job interview. But context is everything in communication.
Exactly. You cannot use a meticulously crafted 2-minute monologue when you are just popping into a quick daily Zoom stand-up.
Yeah.
Or if you are shaking hands at a casual industry mixer.
If you drop a 2-minute PPF at a cocktail party, people will look at you like you have completely lost touch with reality.
They will just slowly back away from you. We have to learn how to scale and adapt our introduction based on the specific environmental context.
Adaptability is the true hallmark of linguistic fluency. You must be able to read the room, assess the social constraints, and adjust the dials on your introduction accordingly.
So let's talk about the specific constraint of time. We reviewed some highly practical YouTube shadowing practice guidelines geared toward Western business culture, specifically corporate environments in North America and the UK.
And their absolute golden rule for meeting introductions: do not waste time.
Right. People in those environments appreciate aggressive conciseness. A meeting introduction should realistically only be 15 to 30 seconds long.
Which feels incredibly brief, especially to non-native speakers who feel they need more time to establish their credibility.
But that constraint forces you to distill your professional identity down to its absolute concentrated essence.
The guidelines suggest abandoning the PTF for these micro-interactions. Instead, they say to rely on 3 rapid-fire elements: who you are, what you do, and something memorable or relevant to the meeting.
I found the sources comparison of a good versus a bad micro intro to be hilarious and deeply relatable. We've all been in meetings with the bad example.
Oh, absolutely. They described a woman named Jessica.
Right. In a rapid-fire meeting, Jessica started her turn by talking about how she moved from Toronto to New York 5 years ago. Then she detailed the specific major of her university degree, reminisced about a small startup she used to work for. I mean, it was exhausting just reading the transcript.
Because in a 15-second window, no one has the cognitive bandwidth to retain her origin story. It reads as a lack of situational awareness.
Contrast that rambling with the excellent, concise version. It goes like this. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Martinez, Senior Financial Analyst for the Asia-Pacific region. I've been with the company for 6 years, focusing primarily on quarterly reporting, and I'm really excited to lend my perspective to this strategic planning committee.
Boom. Done in 12 seconds.
Who she is, what she does, and why her specific presence is relevant to this specific meeting.
And beyond just adjusting the structural length of the introduction, there are incredibly subtle lexical nuances, specific word choices, that must shift depending on the formality of the environment.
Oxford Online English provided some phenomenal insights into these linguistic chunks. Let's dive into those chunks.
So if you are in a highly formal, traditional corporate setting, you lean on established, polite phrasing. Things like, "Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name's Simon."
Or if you were acting as the host and introducing someone else, you would use the formal chunk, "Let me introduce my colleague."
But if you take those exact phrases and use them in an informal, fast-paced startup environment, that level of rigidity would feel incredibly stiff. It would completely alienate you from the group culture.
Instead, you would pivot to informal chunks like, "Hi guys, I'm Sylvia." Or if you were casually introducing 2 people in a break room, you might use the rapid-fire reverse name technique.
I actually hadn't consciously noticed people doing that until I read the source, but it is brilliant in its simplicity.
Yeah, it's just, John, Emma, Emma, John.
It is casual, it is instantaneous, and it gets the social job done without any awkward, drawn-out preambles.
But the Oxford Online English source also highlighted a really specific grammar tip about position titles that completely shifted how I view corporate introductions. It has to do with the articles the versus a or an.
Ah, yes. The definite versus indefinite article distinction. It is a microscopic grammatical choice, but it carries massive psychological weight regarding authority.
Let's break down the psychology of that. If you are the only person in your entire organization holding a specific title, you use the definite article via, "I am the head of human resources," or "I am the lead developer."
Using the psychologically signals singular ownership and definitive authority.
But if you share that title with a dozen other people on your floor, you use the indefinite article, "a" or "an." "I am a project manager."
Or "I am an analyst."
Right.
This is so important. If you are one of many project managers and you introduce yourself as the project manager, you unintentionally signal a massive ego or just a fundamental misunderstanding of your place in the hierarchy.
Getting that tiny article right makes you sound incredibly fluent and deeply aware of the organizational context.
Which seamlessly brings us to an even deeper question about context.
Yeah.
How much of our actual personal selves should we be revealing in these different environments?
Because introducing yourself isn't just about raw data transfer, it is a critical process of cultural integration.
ResUFit actually collected data on this. They found that candidates who successfully adapt their introductions to fit the specific social culture of the company receive 35% higher cultural fit ratings from interviewers.
35% is a massive statistical advantage. That is easily the margin of difference between receiving a lucrative job offer and getting a generic rejection email.
Absolutely. The general rule of thumb they suggest for advanced speakers, those operating at the C1 or C2 level of fluency, is to aim for a specific ratio, an 85 to 90% professional focus blended with a carefully selected 10 to 15% personal focus.
That 10 to 15% is where you actually become a three-dimensional human being to the listener. In casual networking settings, appending a highly specific hobby to the end of your intro makes you incredibly memorable.
The Ion Annapolis source mentions some great examples of this, like wrapping up an intro by casually mentioning you are into underwater photography, or that you spend your weekends learning to play the guitar.
The psychological mechanism at play here is that you are offering the listener a conversational hook.
Exactly. When the formal introduction ends, no one is going to enthusiastically follow up by asking you to elaborate on the intricacies of your quarterly spreadsheet reporting.
Definitely not. But they will absolutely latch onto the hook and ask you about the logistics of underwater photography. It humanizes you and provides an easy, low-stakes off-ramp into genuine conversation.
But let me throw a wrench into this.
Okay, go for it.
What if I'm introducing myself in a digital space where I literally cannot read the room? Let's say I'm joining an asynchronous online course forum or a massive Slack channel for a remote company.
Oh, right. You're just typing into a digital void.
Exactly. I can't see facial expressions, I can't hear laughter, I can't gauge the formality. How on earth do I balance the professional and personal ratio then?
Well, digital text-based introductions require a completely different strategy for generating warmth. And the British Council outlined specific guidelines for exactly this scenario.
Because you are deprived of paralinguistic cues like tone of voice or a physical smile, you have to explicitly write the warmth into the text.
You keep it exceptionally short. You explicitly state what your positive intentions are, such as what you hope to learn from the course. And you proactively offer goodwill to the group, like ending with, "Good luck, everyone."
The source also mentioned punctuation, which feels minor but makes total sense.
Right. They suggested that in casual digital text, you might use exclamation marks slightly more liberally than you ever would in formal academic writing, purely to convey a friendly, approachable tone.
It is essentially using punctuation as a digital smile.
Precisely. You are using the tools available to you in that specific medium to lower the collective affective filter of the group you are joining. Okay, let's take a breath and assess where we are.
Good idea.
At this point, you, the listener, understand the psychological barriers. You have the perfect present, past, future script engineered for formal interviews, and you know how to ruthlessly shrink it down for a 15-second Zoom stand-up.
But here is the brutal reality. A script is just ink on a page. It is utterly useless until you actually force the air out of your lungs and say it out loud.
How do you physically train your mouth, your vocal cords, and your brain to deliver this meticulously crafted script smoothly, especially when your heart rate is spiking?
This is where we must transition our focus from structural strategy to physical mechanics. We have to examine paralinguistics and physical delivery.
Because how you sound, the literal acoustic properties of your voice, carries an immense amount of emotional meaning that is completely independent of the dictionary definitions of the words you're reciting.
The SLA diagnostic example provided for this was profoundly simple but effective. Researchers will take a completely neutral sentence, something like, "Chinese is very easy to learn," and they ask language students to say that exact same sentence using drastically different emotional tones.
Right. They say, deliver the sentence with deep anger. Then say it with overwhelming boredom. Then infuse it with surprise, then doubt, then manic excitement.
And if you analyze the acoustic data of that exercise, the vocabulary doesn't change by a single syllable. The syntax is identical, but the vocal modulation, the shifts in pitch, the velocity of the speech, the micropauses between words, completely alters the underlying message that the listener's brain decodes.
It's all about how you say it.
Exactly. If you walk into a room and deliver a structurally flawless present, past, future introduction, but your paralinguistic tone conveys intense boredom or paralyzing self-doubt, the interviewer's subconscious will reject you instantly, regardless of how impressive your resume data is.
Which is why the physical delivery tips we gathered from the sources are not just superficial advice. They are vital to message transmission. Eye contact is the most obvious one.
If you are in a physical conference room, you have to ensure you are making brief, equitable contact with everyone around the table.
But the virtual environment is where people fail constantly. If you are on a virtual call, you must look directly into the camera lens, not down at the grid of faces on your screen.
It is an incredibly common optical illusion we fall for. When you look at their face on your screen, you appear to them as though you are looking down, avoiding their gaze.
Looking directly into the cold glass of the camera lens simulates direct eye contact for the people on the other side of the screen. It is unnatural, but it is necessary for building digital trust.
You also have to aggressively manage your speaking pace. When that affective filter spikes and the amygdala floods your system with adrenaline, the biological urge is to speed up. You just want to rush through the danger zone as fast as possible.
You have to consciously force your vocal pacing to slow down to a moderate, authoritative rhythm. And you have to smile.
Not a manic, forced grimace, obviously, but a genuine, relaxed smile.
The smile is particularly fascinating because it serves a dual purpose. Socially, it signals to the room that you are approachable and non-threatening. But biologically, the physical act of smiling stimulates the vagus nerve.
And that actually sends a physiological signal back to your own brain, tricking your nervous system into feeling calmer. It physically lowers your own affective filter.
But here is the million-dollar question. How do you actually practice that? How do you get the tone, the authoritative pace, and the emotional resonance right in a second language, sitting alone in your bedroom?
This brings us to one of the most powerful, neurologically robust tools in our entire source stack today, the shadowing technique.
This method was pioneered and popularized by a renowned polyglot named Dr. Alexander Argels. I am absolutely obsessed with this technique.
It's incredibly effective.
I like to think of shadowing like being a jazz musician playing along with a live record. Normally, when you practice language audio, you listen to a native speaker say a sentence, you hit pause, and then in the silence you repeat it from memory. Stop and go.
But with shadowing, there is no pausing. You do not wait your turn.
You actively follow a split second behind the native speaker's audio, talking over them, forcefully mirroring their exact rhythm, their intonation, and their connected speech in real time.
The cognitive science validating this method is rigorous. Let's look at what is happening neurologically. When you use the traditional listen, pause, repeat method, your brain has time to route the information through the prefrontal cortex, translating the English into your native language, analyzing the grammar, and then translating it back to English before you speak.
It's a very clunky process.
Very. But shadowing completely bypasses that translation phase. Because you are forcing yourself to speak almost simultaneously with the audio, you are relying heavily on the brain's mirror neuron system.
You are routing the phonetic data directly to the motor functions in Broca's area, forcing your brain and your mouth muscles to process and reproduce real native speech patterns simultaneously. It sounds chaotic.
It is intensely chaotic at first, and the beauty of the system is that you do not have to be perfect. Even if you miss a syllable or stumble over a complex word, the mere physical act of trying to maintain the pace of the native speaker forces your brain to carve new, more efficient neural pathways.
Over time, the prosody, the music and rhythm of a language, becomes muscle memory.
To see how deep and emotionally resonant this technique can go, we looked at a specific case study from the platform shadowingenglish.com. They featured a woman named Tiana Ortiz.
And what struck me is that Tiana doesn't just use shadowing to practice robotic corporate phrases like, "Hi, my name is Tiana, and I am an analyst." She uses the technique to deliver and embody these emotionally rich, deeply personal narratives.
Her specific introduction is an absolute masterclass in linguistic vulnerability. Instead of listing job titles, she talks about the profound forces that formed her identity.
She utilizes structural phrases like, "I grew up between," to discuss her dual heritage. And one experience that profoundly changed me was to introduce a turning point in her life.
Yes, her story is intense. She talks about attending a bilingual school as a child. She shares a very raw, vulnerable story about her father being deported and how that sudden trauma and geographical change forced her to rapidly adapt to survive.
She talks explicitly about how the process of learning a new language fundamentally rewired how she thinks and how she is able to express complex emotion.
If we analyze why shadowing this specific type of emotional narrative is so incredibly effective for learners, it is because it forcefully moves the student away from stiff, robotic textbook scripts.
By shadowing Tiana's audio, by mimicking the exact dips in her pitch when she discusses trauma, and the rising cadence when she discusses overcoming it, you aren't just memorizing vocabulary words.
You are physically training your vocal cords and your neurological pathways to convey genuine, complex, emotion, resilience, and authenticity in English. You are learning the actual melody of human vulnerability.
It's breathtaking, honestly, to realize you can literally train your vocal cords to sound resilient in a second language. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most practical piece of this entire puzzle.
Shadowing is an amazing, highly specific exercise. But what are the daily, sustained habits? What are the fail-safes a learner can integrate into their morning routine to continuously build this kind of unshakable confidence?
And more importantly, how do you handle those inevitable, terrifying moments when things go completely off the rails?
Because we have to be honest with the audience here. Things will go off the rails. Perfection is a dangerous illusion in language acquisition. The goal is resilience, not flawlessness.
So, what does this all mean? Let's address the elephant in the room regarding flawlessness. If a listener is practicing their shadowing every single day, should their ultimate goal be to sound exactly like a Hollywood actor? Should they be dedicating their energy to completely erasing their native accent?
I cannot stress this enough. Emphatically, categorically, no. According to the insights provided by Jennifer ESL from the pre-platform, which are heavily backed by modern SLA frameworks, the goal for a learner must always be accent reduction, never accent elimination.
Hold on, if I'm understanding this, you are saying that having an accent is not a failure of fluency.
Not at all. It is vital to recognize that literally everyone on Earth has an accent. Even native English speakers possess distinct regional accents that reveal where they were raised.
Your native accent is basically a geographical and cultural map of your history. It's a fundamental part of your identity.
Exactly. The only time a learner needs to proactively work on their accent is if specific phonetic pronunciations are severely hindering clarity and intelligibility.
The priority is clear, comfortable, and efficient communication. Not attempting to surgically erase your heritage, to pretend to be someone you aren't.
So to build that clear, comfortable communication without obsessing over perfection, Jennifer ESL recommends a series of highly practical daily habits.
Let's hear them.
The first one she champions is oral reading fluency. The methodology here is that you take a single, short text and you read that exact same text out loud multiple times in a row.
At first glance, reading the same paragraph 4 times seems kind of redundant.
But neurologically, it is brilliant. When you read a text for the first time, your brain is entirely consumed by the decoding phase. It's translating the vocabulary, parsing the grammar, figuring out the meaning of the sentence.
But by the 3rd or 4th pass of that exact same text, your brain already knows what the words mean. It doesn't have to spend computing power on decoding.
Therefore, it can shift all of its focus purely to the physical flow, the prosody, and the smooth pronunciation of the connected speech.
She also highly recommends reading English news headlines every single day, not just to stay informed on current events, but to consistently, repeatedly expose your brain to the structural patterns and the specific punchy syntax of written English. It builds passive pattern recognition.
And then there is the habit that requires the most courage, the 5-minute phone call challenge.
Oh wow, this one is intense. For non-native speakers, practicing English on a phone call is often described as uniquely terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you are on the phone, you are brutally stripped of all visual paralinguistic cues.
You cannot read the other person's lips. You cannot see their hand gestures to decipher context. You cannot see their smile to know if they are joking. It is just you, the raw audio, and silence.
So committing to a 5-minute phone call with a practice partner or a tutor is a crucible. But if you can survive the sensory deprivation of the phone, you build massive, resilient confidence.
If you can handle a phone call, standing in a well-lit boardroom feels like a walk in the park.
To balance that high-stress auditory practice, the ASCD research also provided some excellent low-stress strategies. These are particularly designed for learners who are still severely struggling with a high effective filter. They highly recommend the use of dialogue journals.
How does a dialogue journal work in practice?
It is essentially a private, ongoing, written conversation between a language learner and a teacher, mentor, or fluent partner. The learner writes a journal entry in English, and the mentor writes back, responding naturally to the content, not just correcting the grammar with a red pen.
It creates a completely judgment-free asynchronous zone. It allows the learner to experiment with new vocabulary and test out complex sentences without the terror of public real-time failure. It slowly builds their courage to use those words verbally later.
They also suggested a very simple rule, explicitly taking 3 minutes of think time before speaking in a low-space environment. Just giving yourself the psychological permission to pause, breathe, and internally map out your thoughts before you open your mouth, rather than feeling pressured to respond in a millisecond.
But Let's face the ultimate nightmare scenario. You are in the high-stakes job interview. You have bypassed the bouncer. You are halfway through your beautifully structured present, past, future introduction, and your brain simply crashes.
It just deletes the file.
You completely lose your place mid-sentence?
Yeah.
What is the actual tactical protocol for that moment?
The first thing you must do is recognize what is happening biologically. The moment you lose your place, your amygdala is going to sound the alarm, and the affective filter is going to try to slam shut, which will cause you to physically freeze.
You have to physically breathe to interrupt that circuit.
And then you use specific rehearsed linguistic filler phrases to elegantly buy your cognitive centers the time they need to reboot.
Oxford Online English gave us a great list of lifesavers for this exact moment. Instead of freezing in wide-eyed panic and staring at the interviewer in silence, you smoothly and calmly deploy a filler phrase.
You say, "Where was I?" Or, "So what was I saying?" Or even with a slight self-deprecating smile. What's the word in English again?
Using these phrases does not make you look incompetent. On the contrary, it demonstrates that you are in complete command of the conversational flow, even if you momentarily lost your specific train of thought. It signals fluency.
And we must also equip the listener for situations where the introduction leads to hostile or difficult follow-up questions. If you are asked a question you truly do not want to answer or genuinely do not know how to answer in the moment, you employ a strategy known as the 3 Ds: delay, deflect, dismiss.
Walk me through the mechanics of the 3 Ds.
It relies on using polite, highly indirect language to maintain control of your boundaries. If you need to delay, you might say, "That is a complex issue. I'd love to circle back to that later in the conversation."
If you need to deflect, you pivot the focus. Well, I don't have the exact data on that specific metric. What I can tell you about our overall strategy is.
And if you need to dismiss a wholly inappropriate or irrelevant line of questioning, you maintain your authority with something like, "I appreciate your input on that, but let's keep our focus on the project timeline."
It allows you to maintain professional authority and keep the conversation moving without resorting to aggressive confrontation or crumbling into submission. It is entirely about keeping the conversational ball in the air on your own terms.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense, truly foundational amount of ground today. We started by diagnosing the hidden biological root of the problem, identifying the effective filter, understanding how the amygdala acts as a bouncer, and learning how to lower that barrier by normalizing our errors and viewing them as data rather than character flaws.
From that stable psychological foundation, we built a strategic architecture using the present, past, future framework, ensuring that when the filter is open, our formal introductions are perfectly paced, ruthlessly edited, and driven by empirical outcomes rather than vague adjectives.
We then learned how to be socially adaptable, scaling that 2-minute monologue down to a 15-second punchy micro intro for Zoom meetings.
We analyze how to subtly tweak our formality, our lexical chunks, and even our use of definite articles based on the cultural dynamics of the room we are stepping into.
We explored the physical mechanics of transmission, realizing that vocal tone and paralinguistics can completely alter the meaning of our words.
And we broke down the neurology of the shadowing technique to build muscle memory, override the translation phase, and develop genuine vocal confidence.
And finally, we locked in the long-term daily habits, from oral reading fluency to the terrifying crucible of the 5-minute phone challenge, to ensure we are striving for clear, resilient communication while actively rejecting the harmful myth of accent elimination.
All of which brings us back to what I believe is the most profound, overarching insight from the pre-play research and the shadowing case studies. We tend to view language learning as a purely transactional, mechanical process of swapping one vocabulary word for another.
But it is not. It is an act of deep psychological transformation. It is the active discovery of a new version of yourself.
Think about the depth of what Tiana Ortiz demonstrated. Every single language you acquire, every new syntactic structure you master, literally teaches your brain how to formulate ideas differently.
It teaches you how to express complex emotion and how to connect with other human beings in a totally new frequency. When you take a deep breath, open your mouth, and introduce yourself in English, you aren't just reciting a dry resume of your past.
You are actively introducing a brand new facet of your personality to the world. The precise vocabulary you choose, the rhythm and prosody of your speech, the hard-won confidence you project after hours of shadowing, it all paints a vivid, real-time picture of this evolving identity.
So the next time you find yourself in that cold conference room, and the meeting leader claps their hands, the spotlight swings your way, and they ask you to introduce yourself, I want you to completely reframe the moment.
Do not think of it as a threat. Do not think of it as a test of your grammar.
Think of it as an unveiling. You know exactly how to bypass the panic of the bouncer. You have the structural architecture to hold your narrative together. You have trained your voice to carry the melody of your experience.
The only question left for you to answer is, who is that new person going to be?
A fascinating, lifelong question to explore. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep practicing, keep shadowing, and keep discovering that entirely new version of yourself. We'll see you next time.